RealTalk USA.
Hello everyone, this is our weekly show RealTalk USA on 15.3 FM, and it's me, Eyol Solomon, with
Ms. Gawat Haddasa. Good afternoon, everyone. We have with us today Ms. Elizabeth Vish, who works at the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C. She works as a policy advisor in the Office of the Coordinator for Cyber Issues. Her office is leading the U.S. government's efforts to promote an open, interoperable, secure, and reliable information and communications infrastructure that supports international trade and commerce, strengthens international security, and fosters free expression and innovation. Welcome, Ms. Vish. Thank you for accepting our invitation to be a guest on Real Talk USA.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Is it your first time in Addis?
It is, yeah. I've been covering cyber issues in Africa for about 2.5 years now, and coming to Addis has been one of my real priorities, and so I'm glad that finally I was able to make it.
Fantastic. Before we begin, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I joined the Department of State in 2013. I was a Presidential Management Fellow, which is one of the programs that the department uses to recruit civil servants to take on policy leadership roles. So I joined in 2013. For a while, I worked on economic issues in the Office of Monetary Affairs in the Economic and Business Bureau. And then I got really interested in cyber issues when in about 2014, when the Sony hack happened, where the U.S. decided to take a very robust response to that hack. And so I heard about it on the news and read about that time. The Office of the Coordinator for Cyber Issues posted a detail for a PMF, and one of the things about being a Presidential Management Fellow is that you have to go do 2 short details at different parts of the department and outside of the department as well in the U.S. government. And so I decided to do one of my details in the Office of the Coordinator for Cyber Issues, and I worked there for about 3 months. And I had the pleasure of traveling to Kinshasa, DRC as part of that trip. And so I found it to be fascinating. And a few months later, when a job opened up in that office, I had the pleasure of accepting it. So
wonderful. Before we proceed, can you tell us a bit more about the Presidential Management Fellowship?
Yeah, definitely.
Sounds interesting, but I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it's a program that Congress put in place for hiring civil servants throughout the federal government, and it hires folks who have completed graduate level education in a variety of fields. You go through a process of applying for the Presidential Management Fellow. It's open to U.S. citizens who have completed graduate degrees or are going to complete their graduate degree. You go through an application process. You're approved as a finalist, and then departments and agencies can choose to hire you on as a fellow. It's a 2-year program, and at the end of the 2-year program, most fellows convert into the civil service. So the Department of State really relies on the Presidential Management Fellow program as a way to bring in young leaders who are ready to excel in the federal government, and a lot of the really senior civil servants at the department came into the department as Presidential Management Fellows.
And you could study anything, your background could be from...
Yeah, it depends. So a lot of the folks at Department of State have studied public affairs or foreign affairs. There was somebody at the Department of State who got a graduate degree in archaeology, and she came into the Department of State through the Presidential Management Fellows program and brought sort of that science and anthropology and sort of that perspective. So, folks who have business degrees, some people have law degrees, and they come in through a variety of educational backgrounds, but take roles at the department that the department wants to fill.
Awesome. What was your background, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I did a master's degree in international affairs and with some economics as well from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in D.C. And before that, I worked at the National Democratic Institute working on democracy and governance programs.
Well, that's all wonderful, but very far from the realm of cyberspace.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
How are you? What exactly does it entail being in the office of the coordinator for cyber issues? What do you do? Policy in general is very, very interesting, but very difficult to produce.
Yeah.
And cyber issues in general are also very, you know what I mean. So
Definitely.
can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so our job in our office is really to advance the national security of the United States through engaging with foreign partners on a broad range of cyber issues. We are diplomats. Many of us are civil servants. Some of us are foreign service officers in my office. But we are diplomats in the classic sense, in that our job is to build relationships with foreign governments on the topics that our office covers: cybersecurity, combating cybercrime, enhancing freedom of expression online, and helping foreign partners to respect the fact that people have the same rights online as they do offline. Working with them on basic things like cybersecurity hygiene and public awareness campaigns. And then internet governance issues, so who manages the internet. So there's some topics that we handle that we use the skills and tools of diplomacy to advance U.S. national security on those topics. So that includes, I guess I'll say, that includes things like we hold bilateral dialogues with important foreign partners on cyber issues. They're whole of government dialogues, so we'll bring, if we have a dialogue, we had a dialogue in Kenya in 2016. We brought 2017. We brought representatives from Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and Department of Commerce. We also engaged with Department of Defense and with other parts of the federal government, and we sort of bring together all of our side of the puzzle and have policy dialogues with our foreign partners, where they also bring all of their government interagency side. So bilateral dialogues is one big area where we engage. We also engage through multilateral fora like the International Telecommunications Union and other UN bodies. The UN Group of Governmental Experts on ICT and National Security is one big area where we engage. And then we also work on capacity building. And that's kind of what brings me here to Addis, is engagement with African governments on sort of forming national cybersecurity strategies, building computer emergency response teams, and legislation to enhance cybersecurity and combat cybercrime.
Awesome. When I hear the term cyberspace, cybersecurity, cyber issues, I know it entails, the internet and that space where, behind the computers. But can you give us examples of, for example, cyber issues or cyber hygiene? That's actually the first time I actually heard that term.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll talk a little bit. Let me start with talking about cyber hygiene and sort of cybersecurity with a little s, little cybersecurity. This is one of the key areas where when you think cybersecurity or cyber hygiene, you're thinking about the kinds of things that we do to defend computers and networked technology from malicious activities. That's everything as basic as use a strong password. Don't just use the same password for every account you have. Public awareness things like making sure that you're using passwords. Don't put your public information on the internet if you don't want it to be public. All the way to, we talk about cybersecurity, the sort of protection of critical infrastructure and the really challenging things that we do to defend like industrial control systems. So our big partner when we talk about cybersecurity is we work a lot with the Department of Homeland Security and their offices that, among other things, host the U.S. CERT and other pieces of the sort of network defense. So that's one of the pillars that we talk about when we think about cyber issues. Another pillar that we'll talk about is working on making sure that we protect freedom of expression online. So the U.S. is part of the Freedom Online Coalition. A couple African governments are also members, Ghana and Kenya. That's a group of like-minded nations that get together to enhance and protect people's ability to express their opinions and freely associate online. As I mentioned before, people have the same rights online as they do offline. And so we stand by that right, and we advance that recognition of those rights in international and multilateral fora.
Fantastic. And you mentioned some of these already, but if you have any follow-on regarding why cyber issues are cross-cutting.
Yeah, definitely. So I think cross-cutting is a way to talk about cross-cutting is to think about when we want to talk about cyber issues, and I've just talked about two of the topics
Yes.
that we cover. It's not something where you can just have one group of people in a room and try to address the problem. The cybersecurity of one network matters for the cybersecurity of other pieces of that network. And so the best practices that we encourage people to follow not only enhance their own individual security, but also enhance the security of the whole network. And I think one example of the area where you can see how cross-cutting these issues are is the interplay between cybersecurity, like network defense, and cybercrime. So if people are very good about things like using strong passwords and for maybe thinking about multi-factor authentication, things like not only do you have a password, but also you have a code that you have to enter.
On your cell phone
Exactly.
Yeah.
If people do those kinds of good practices, they're a lot less susceptible to cybercrime. But at the same time, if we're very good at detecting, investigating, prosecuting cybercrime, then the threat that's out there in the world is less scary because there are fewer people who are going to commit crimes when they know they're going to get caught and arrested, and they're less likely to fall prey to crime if there are fewer people out there attacking them.
True. Okay. Now I want to raise the May 2017 executive order on cyber issues. If you can tell us a little bit about that, how does the U.S. administration look at cyber issues? And how should they be? Why should they be a priority for like African governments, African nations?
Yeah, definitely. So given the transnational nature of the internet and communications infrastructure, the U.S. believes that international cooperation is really basically essential to effectively confront the risks that we're seeing. As cyber incidents and threats are more varied and more serious, we're talking about, state-sponsored attacks like WannaCry and NotPetya.
If you can tell us more about
sure.
those.
Let me. Okay. So as these things get more serious, the ways that we seek to address those incidents have to expand from primarily technical responses to responses that encompass a full range of diplomatic, law enforcement, economic, and other actions. So the President's May 2017 Executive Order on Cybersecurity recognizes these challenges in cyberspace and lays out several lines of effort to address them, including enhancing international cooperation. And that's where my office comes in. So in the Executive Order, the EO calls for a whole-of-government international engagement strategy on cybersecurity. And the Department of State, drawing from inputs from the interagency, was tasked to write that. And based on our work on that strategy, among others, one of our priorities includes capacity building, which is what brings me here. That's an important way to engage with international partners, which is, again, sort of why I'm here. So the executive order was really an important way that the president signaled and the White House signaled that this administration takes cybersecurity issues really seriously. And the international engagement strategy was one of the pieces of the puzzle that the State Department put together. But also, we issued a second report, which was on deterring America's adversaries in cyberspace. And so both of those reports we worked on with the interagency over the course of several months. Several long months in some cases. They were really products that, while the department issued them, were whole of government. So we had input from Department of Commerce, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, many others who I can't name them all here just because there's so many of them. But those two reports really demonstrate how State Department is being involved in protecting America's networks and protecting global networks through engaging with our foreign partners.
Anything more you want to add about U.S. government's efforts working in collaboration with the African Union on cybersecurity issues? Yeah,
so the African Union is really one of our key partners. we have a long and very productive relationship with the team here. Among other things, we have a memorandum of understanding that we signed, I want to say, a few years ago now, before I even joined the team. And that MOU outlines, among other things, our desire to collaborate on building the capacity of AU member states. And I'm really pleased that this training or this engagement this week is a great example where we've been working with Mokhtar and the team under this commissioner for some time. And one of the things that I think Mokhtar has announced in this training that I think is really great is that he hopes that all member states do three things: that they draft and publish a national cybersecurity strategy, that they build a computer emergency response team, and that they pass legislation on cybersecurity and cybercrime so that we can collaborate internationally to address these issues together. So I think that we're in a really good place. Many African nations have already done two or even three of those things. There's a number of countries in Africa who've joined the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime, which is an international convention to reach mutual criminality and make it possible for us to exchange things like electronic evidence so that member states or participants in the Budapest Convention can easily exchange information with one another and do that good work that we were doing about investigating and prosecuting criminals who want to steal our money or hurt us online. So I think that we're in a really good place, and I'm looking forward to continuing the collaboration with the AU.
Wonderful. Is there anything else you want to add? Any more information? Something very interesting, like cybersecurity sounds, where are the hackers? Tell us stories.
Yeah, stories. Oof. It's a challenging issue because a lot of the things that we look at, like where are the hackers, that can be a really complicated question, and that's, I think, something that's a real challenge for us as we deal with especially the international security implications of cybersecurity. So you might see a hacker located, an intrusion, a malicious actor on a network, and tracing them back to the place where they actually came from, and then figuring out, well, who exactly are they, can be really, really complicated, right?
Yes.
And I'll say that one thing that we think, and this is something that we talk about in both of those reports, is that we really think that collaboration with foreign partners and allies and engagement with all stakeholders is really important for us to think about these issues in a way that we can actually get to those questions, like who is that really behind that computer over there that seems to be coming through three different routers and it's hard to trace them back. So that's why international collaboration on cyber is so important.
And I can only imagine, with so many departments involved, how more complex and complicated cyber issues are. Can you elaborate a little bit more on international engagement strategy and what that is?
Yeah, so as part of the executive order, the State Department, as I mentioned, worked with our interagency partners to build a strategy for how we were going to work with foreign governments on enhancing cybersecurity and cyber issues and achieving our goals and our vision that you so adequately read out, so beautifully, eloquently read for us earlier in this interview. So under that, we sort of have 5 objectives, and we have some actions under each of those objectives for how the U.S. is going to achieve our vision for cyberspace. And the first is increasing international stability and reducing the risk of conflict stemming from the use of cyberspace. So among other things, that includes promoting international commitments regarding what constitutes acceptable and unacceptable state behavior in cyberspace from all states, and sort of how international law applies to cyberspace. We have broad international agreement that international law does apply in cyberspace, and we're working on enhancing understanding how it applies. And then developing and implementing cyber confidence building measures in bilateral and regional security venues. That's things like exchanging points of contact between governments. So if we see something that concerns us, we know who we can reach out to in a foreign government to talk about some activity that we might be concerning, that might be concerning to us, and talk about, raise the concerns that we have with our foreign partners. And then also promoting a new cooperative framework in support of cyber deterrence and cost imposition on malicious state actors and state-sponsored malicious activity. And we have a specific report focused on deterring malicious activity in cyberspace that I think you can, our listeners can find if they're able to go to the State Department website, to the Office of the Coordinator for Cyber Issues. You can find both the International Engagement Strategy and the Deterrence Report public summaries on our website. So that's sort of international stability side. Our second priority is sort of identifying, detecting, disrupting, and deterring malicious cyber actors. And then responding to, protecting, and responding to threats that are posed by these actors, and enhancing the resilience of global cyber ecosystems. So that's the sort of the cyber hygiene that I talked about earlier. One of the big things that we're doing under that is working with foreign partners on public awareness campaigns. And the U.S. public awareness campaign is called Stop, Think, Connect. It's really a outreach that Department of Homeland Security leads along with private sector partners. That includes academia and actually, in fact, anybody, any entity, academia, etc., can nonprofits can actually apply to be a Stop, Think, Connect partner. So I would encourage listeners, if they work at a company or a academic institution or a nonprofit, to look at the Stop, Think, Connect website and consider joining as a Stop, Think, Connect partner. That gets them access to public awareness campaign materials like posters or slogans in terms of the content, so that they can use that content to build a public awareness campaign and think about sort of basic cybersecurity hygiene. There's a lot of work under sort of identifying, detecting, and disrupting malicious cyber actors. One of the really key areas, in addition to public awareness campaigns, is enhancing information sharing through automation and computer security response. Some computer security incident response teams, so CSIRTs. We talked about how the AU is interested in forming CSIRTs at each member states, and that's really a priority for the U.S. as well. And so our third priority area under the international engagement strategy is upholding an open and interoperable internet where human rights are protected and freely exercised, and where cross-border data flows are protected. So that's sort of the things that we talked about under freedom of expression, our continued participation in the Freedom Online Coalition, defending access to an open internet in multilateral and international fora where it's challenged. We often get countries who want to talk about information security and who want to control citizens' access to information online. And the U.S. really opposes that. And we work very hard in all multilateral venues to protect language that has to do with freedom of expression online. And we also support internet freedom programs that fund civil society organizations that do technology development, digital safety training, policy advocacy, and applied research. And SCCI, my office, works very closely with the DRL, the Democracy, Rights, and Labor Office Bureau in the department. So we have a lot of close colleagues that we work with on that issue. And then the fourth sort of policy area that we cover is maintaining the essential role of non-governmental stakeholders in how cyberspace is governed. So right now, the way that the internet is managed is through what we call the multi-stakeholder model, where it's not just governments that decide the rules of the road, but in fact, it's everybody. It's nonprofit associations, it's academia, it's the technical community, the people who build the computer systems and who know how to operate them. And governments and private sector, the folks who maybe own and operate computer systems. And we think that each of those pieces have a part to play in deciding the rules of the road for the internet. So that's really an important area for us. And then I'd say the last pillar is to advance an international regulatory environment that supports innovation and respects the global nature of cyberspace. This is where we talk a little bit about how important networked technologies are for economic growth. And we really need to make sure that we protect the ability of somebody to take a cell phone from one country and use it in another country. Obviously know your customer is important, but it's important that technologies work in multiple different countries, because the reason that the internet is so successful is because it breaks down these barriers from household to household and city to city and country to country, where you can talk to somebody in Korea from here in Ethiopia as quickly as you would by going over to their house next door. And that's how we get the benefit from this technology. And so making sure that all of our systems are interoperable and that data can flow freely between cities and between countries is really what it's all about, and why we get so much benefit from the internet. So those are kind of the five areas that we're engaging on. And I'd say that they all sort of hang together. That we can't rely on the interoperability. The internet doesn't work if it doesn't go cross borders. But if we're afraid that states are sponsoring attacks, that makes us feel like we should try to close down our borders, right? And the U.S. doesn't feel that way, but it can seem like a threatening system if we're not doing a good job of both sort of network defense, using strong passwords, those kinds of things, but also taking very seriously the responsibilities that states have, that governments have to support an open, interoperable, secure, and reliable internet.
Thank you. One quick question. I for example, the man on the street, the regular Joe. An issue for someone like that would be, for example, identity theft. Those, I would say, in particularly in Ethiopia, mostly in Africa, are not we're not online, so that is not a threat yet. But do you know of other examples that could be basically a threat to the common man when we're talking about cyber issues? What could be examples? What could be the things that people should look out for? Like, why should they protect their password? Why should they have strong passwords?
That's a great question. So let me start by talking about social networking. I think that a lot of people, their first interaction with networked devices is through the use of Facebook or through the use of LinkedIn or through other Instagram, other social networks. And social networks are, companies from all over the world.
They could be local, they could be international,
and I would say that people really benefit from participating in these kinds of networks. You can use them to communicate family information. You can use them to share pictures. I mean, I love looking at pictures of my friends' little kids on Facebook. And those are really valuable and beneficial. But oftentimes people will put things on those networks that they don't want to have made public. They'll have a picture of a child that they don't want to be shared, or they'll put on, information about an event that they went to that they don't necessarily want to be public. And so making sure that you're using strong passwords for things like social networks is a really important way to protect your online identity. And you would never want somebody to be able to pretend to be you online. And so keeping things secure can be a really important way of protecting your online identity. I would also say another thing is that I would really also highlight the importance of using non-pirated software, so official software that's been purchased from the manufacturer. And that's important because it's really important for your devices, your cell phones that have technology that connects to the internet, or your computers that connect to the internet. If you're not using patched software, you could find that there's malicious software on your device, and it could be vulnerable to have all of the data that's on your device stolen and used against you. And you could also be vulnerable to hosting software that is attacking somebody else from your computer. And nobody wants to be the person who's hosting, bad malware that's attacking your cousin or that's being used to like attack a bank. So it's really important that your individual device have software protections and use up-to-date software that's getting patches and that you download those patches. Sometimes it'll say, install software updates. And you want to be seeing that happen regularly because that means that your computer is getting updates. That means that it's less likely to be vulnerable to hackers and therefore is less likely to be used as part of a global cybercrime and malicious actors network.
That's very important information. Thank you for sharing with us. One question we always ask all our guests on RealTalk USA is, what is their most favorite thing about the United States?
Oh,
yes.
That's a great question. I think that the thing that one thing I really appreciate about the United States is the really high degree of respect we have for freedom of expression. I'm really grateful that our Constitution has this really high standard for people are able to say whatever they want to say, even if it's, even speech that is abhorrent, speech that I don't support, I don't like, we're still protected. And that means that if my opinions ever become unpopular and people think that what I'm saying is abhorrent, I at least always will have the freedom to say it, regardless of there are some limits, right? You can't yell fire in a crowded theater because that's causing people pain and harm and, is dangerous. But in general, we have the ability to say whatever we want to say. We can criticize the government. We can criticize individuals. And I think that's one thing that I really appreciate about the United States.
Thank you so much for being on RealTalk USA, Ms. Vish.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Real Talk USA.
It's my house, come on, turn it up.
The hour where the U.S. mission to the African Union comes to you through Afro FM 105.3 to highlight the United States partnership in Africa. Current issues will be discussed. Guests will engage on a variety of topics ranging from politics to jazz. Co-hosted by Euel Solomon of Afro FM and Chris Mead of USAU. The show will air every Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. Feel free to participate by sending messages to the USAU social media sites www.usau.usmission.gov or www.facebook.com/USAU and follow USAU on twitter.com/USAU.
Just relax. Welcome to my house.
Real Talk USA.
Welcome to my house. It's my house.